I'm very proud of myself. All right, we're going to go ahead and call tonight's study session to order. We have one item on the agenda, which is our FYE 2020 Capital Improvement Program budget status. Our main presenter today will be our Finance Director, Anthony Francisco, but we have everyone here because everything is involved in the budget process. So with that, Mr. Francisco, please take it away.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Actually, I'm a Domino's pizza delivery guy right now.
Sorry.
budgets are tough.
Student resident roundtable met right before this. And
So we are at the midpoint now in the budget preparation process for the fiscal year 2020 through 2021 capital improvements budget. And we're going to, at this point, just kind of review some things that we've already talked about, update some project statuses, and then talk about some direction that council may give as we prepare the city manager's proposed capital budget for fiscal year 21. Just some background, and we've talked about this before, but I know that there are some individuals who may not have seen this before. So what is a capital project, and what are the sources of funds in our capital fund and our various capital funds? By definition, a capital improvement program is to support the general governmental services. We identify projects in the long-range master plan, and we set priorities based on the short term and the long term, based on what council wants to see, basically. The CIP plans and budgets are adopted annually, but only the budget is appropriated. So it's a one-year appropriated budget and a 5-year total capital plan. There are various sources included in our capital program. There are enterprise revenues, there are general obligation bonds that the voters approve, intergovernmental grants, private donations can be accounted for in the capital funds, and there is the 0.7% capital sales tax. And I would be remiss if I did not point out my continuing pet peeve about people saying capital penny. There's no such thing. It is a 0.7% dedicated capital sales tax. What is a capital project? And again, this is a loose definition, but it is based on accounting standards and the Oklahoma Municipal Budget Act. Generally speaking, capital project has a cost above $100,000. It has a useful life of 5 years or more. It is a tangible asset. It's something that you can see, feel, and touch. It usually takes more than one fiscal year to complete a lot of these capital projects. And in a lot of cases, we contract with outside agencies to either do the engineering design or the construction of the projects. Within the capital program, there are also allocations within the 0.7% capital sales tax for what are called capital outlay items. And again, this is from the Oklahoma Municipal Budget Act. But capital outlays are items, are expenses that have a useful life between 1 and 5 years. So it's not those 20-year bridge projects that have a useful life of 50 years. These are things like vehicles and furniture and computers that have a useful life, generally speaking, between 1 and 5 years. Our capital outlay items are paid for out of that 0.7% capital sales tax for the most part, and they are accounted for in the general fund and the Westwood fund, some special revenue funds that the capital outlay items are booked as fixed assets in the department or the operation where they'll be used, but funding comes from the capital fund. Here's a list of all of the funds that are included in the city's capital improvement program, and as you see, there are many of them. The largest is the capital fund, where we account for the general obligation bond projects and the pay-as-you-go projects. But there are also capital projects in the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund, the CDBG Fund, the Room Tax Fund, the Parkland Development Fund, And of course, the Norman Forward Sales Tax Fund and University North Park TIF Fund are capital funds. The major expenditures in both of those funds are for capital projects. The enterprise funds, different from the general fund, which the expenses are driven by personnel costs. In the enterprise funds, the expenditures are driven by capital projects. So generally speaking, about 80% of the costs in the general fund are for personnel-related expenses. But in the enterprise funds, about 80% of the costs are concentrated in capital projects. So obviously in the enterprise funds, capital projects have a major part of the operation. In total, we have about $238 million that we anticipate in revenue coming in this fiscal year from various sources. The largest of them are bond projects, whether they be the Norman Forward note projects, general obligation bonds, where we have issued debt. That's that part of the pie that's shown there as bonds. User fees, where those enterprise fund projects are being funded from the users that pay for the water, sewer, and refuse utilities. Those projects are accounted for in that part of the pie. And then the capital sales tax is about 20% of that pie, and that's down there at the bottom. On the expense side then, the largest part of the pie this year is for park and recreation projects, and that's kind of unusual. But this year we have a lot of high dollar projects being in the park area, particularly for those Norman Forward projects. And so we have a large part of that pie of our capital program in this fiscal year that's in the park and recreation and building and ground areas. Usually the transportation piece is a larger part of the pie, and those are those street projects, bridge projects are in that transportation category. So the Capital Improvement Fund was established in 1976 when the voters approved that that dedicated sales tax for capital projects, and we established a separate fund to account for it. Each year when the council adopts the budget, you adopt guidelines for how you want to use that 0.7% capital sales tax. And these are just guidelines that has been followed for many years. But about 27% of that 0.7% capital sales tax has gone for those capital outlay items that we talked about. 36% is for debt service and other projects. 25% is for street maintenance. Now, you can change that guideline at any time when you adopt the budget, but those guidelines have been in place for a long time, and they're very prudent. The reason that we do what we do is that these are the priorities that we set. We want to maintain our streets. Okay? We want to do those stormwater and bridge projects that are in that other project category. As we have gone forward in this fiscal year, we project that we will have about $600,000 available for new projects that might be identified. And again, that is assuming all of our projections are right. All of the projects are going to be done at their budgeted level, no more, no less, and we don't add any new projects. I should point out that that does not account for the reduction in the capital fund for the continued apportionment of sales tax from the capital fund to the University North Park TIF fund. So again, just as we did in the general fund, we made an assumption for the capital fund that the apportionment of sales tax would end June 30th of 2019. Council adopted an ordinance to enact that budget assumption, and that has been set aside. So we are assuming, or if we continue on the course that we're on, continuing to apportion sales tax, in addition to the roughly $3.5 million that the general fund will be shorted, there'll be about $600,000 that will be shorted to the capital fund. Now, we haven't done a lot of, panicking counsel about that because it's a lot easier to manage the shortfall in the capital fund than it is in the general fund. We don't think you need to do any drastic measures to account for that shortfall in the capital fund, but it will be there.
Thank you. Councilor Wilson?
Clarification, 600,000 short, meaning $1.2 million overall?
No, it just happens to be about the same amount.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of a wash?
Kind of a wash, yeah.
Thank you.
As we are preparing the 21 budget, there's available for new projects of about $2.6 million before we do anything that has not been programmed already. And as we go forward in this presentation, you will see where a lot of that money is proposed to be spoken for.
All right.
Councilor Wilson?
Does that account for our shortfalls that,
No.
okay.
Now, again, the shortfall in fiscal year 21 in the capital fund is only about $75,000. It's not a significant amount in the capital fund.
Thank you.
An overview of projects that have been completed during the course of this fiscal year. The 10-mile Flat Creek Bridge has been completed. We're continuing with the TMDL compliance. We'll talk more about that. I believe you're going to have an agenda item about that next council meeting. The Acre Street sidewalk has been completed.
I have another question. Are these
Councilor
numbers?
Wilson.
No, I'm sorry. Are these numbers next to those? What are those numbers next to?
Those are the expenditures for those projects.
Okay.
And the phase 1 of the James Garner project, which is right in front of the new library, has been completed.
Councilor Jones?
So, just for the record's sake, the 10-mile Flat Creek Bridge, it's a two-part question. One, wasn't that a transportation bond, 2012 transportation bond project? And two, with the delay, what kind of discounts were we able to get?
Down to further, Scott or Sean.
Jennifer, I think you're confusing this project with the one on Brookhaven Creek. This is what we call the Glenn Floyd Bridge.
Right,
This
I
is
was.
the one, right. And Anthony can remind me, where the city paid a portion of this and then the property owners paid a portion. Is this our portion, Anthony? Do you
I
know?
believe this is our
I
portion.
think it is too. Anyway.
From the lawsuit. Okay,
From
so
the-
my
right.
question, just out of curiosity, still stands. Is that project closed on West Main?
Very close. Still some work in the channel today and this week, but ODOT is wrapping things up any day now.
Do we know
Actually,
if
this confusing.
ODOT is going
That's why I was
to,
like 328,000.
what the price tag is going to be with that for the delay?
We don't know. ODOT's pretty generous with their weather days, so that's a process that will go on for the next month or two as we're negotiating with the contractor and what was a weather day and what wasn't. We don't expect a big refund of any sort on that project. The project came in very well, came in right at the target of the city's anticipated share with additional federal funding, so we're really doing well on that project.
Okay, thank you.
These are projects that they're pretty much complete, but we still have bills to pay. The Rock Creek Road project, the sidewalk and trails project on 24th Avenue, the $17 million CDBG project on the rural roads in East Norman is pretty much complete now. We have to do a final audit and that sort of thing.
17 million in Ward 5.
All right.
That's right. Because I was elected, I think.
Yeah.
It's all you.
Tell me.
Here are some projects that are underway this year. The Transit Park Emergency Vehicle Maintenance Facility is under design. We have a budget for that project of about $6 million. The Legacy Park parking lot is about complete. That was about $175,000. We talked about the TMDL study. Fire Station 9, I think, is complete now. The land use and transportation plan update, we have some money remaining in the budget for that project, but it's about complete. And this is the other West Main Street Bridge project. And this is the one that's just east of 48th Street.
Councilmember Holman.
The maintenance facility, how much of the 6 million is funded?
Let's see. All the transit portion is about 3 million of that budget, and it is unfunded. 2 million is for the park maintenance facility that's funded out of Norman Forward, and about 800,000 is the emergency vehicle facility that's funded out of the public safety sales tax bonds.
And the parks facility, though, needs 2 more million, though.
Yeah, we'll talk about some overruns in that project and some other ones later on in the presentation. But as engineering has progressed on that project and some other ones, the latest engineering estimates are above these budgets, but these are the budgets.
So Legacy Park parking lot, that's paid for, it's almost finished. I
Yes,
guess. TMDL compliance for year 4 is paid for already.
Yes, sir.
And Fire Station 9,
Is done.
land use, so all these are paid for already?
Not all of them.
Almost.
Yeah, but almost all of them.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Scott.
We're getting to the Robinson and Crossroads project.
We'll get to that.
Okay, just checking in.
And for what it's worth, we have had phone calls with Senator Inhofe's office about trying to, if you recall, OU had to pay money back, and since this was kind of an unprecedented procedure, while it obviously should have come to the new operator of what the money was for, that's not what happened, and we have no good news to report at this point. They've suggested we apply for some grants, but they have not found a mechanism to get that money back to us. So hopefully it'll come to us eventually. It'd be nice to get a check for $3 million to invest in public transportation because we're always going to need it. But at this time, that is not going to help us.
Okay.
Thanks, Obama. Just kidding. Just kidding.
It is his fault.
Again, some projects that are under construction are proposed to be under construction next fiscal year. We've talked about the HVAC equipment at the Animal Welfare Center. That actually was moved up. Municipal complex renovation, we have money in the 2008 general obligation bonds for that. The 24th Avenue East bond project is underway. The multimodal path on 36th Avenue to 48th Avenue on State Highway 9
Excuse me, Mr.
will be
Francisco.
underway next
Councilmember
year.
Patron?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just point of information, should we assume that when you say like we have money for that,
We have
that the
programmed.
numbers that you're saying in parentheses, like municipal complex renovation, 9.488, that we have 9.488, or we have some money?
This is what was programmed previously. So when we adopted the budget for fiscal year 20, this is what we programmed for fiscal year 21. This is subject to change.
And the
You may
second-
decide not to do these projects.
Okay, so the second part of it is, should we assume that the money in parentheses matches the project?
It would be dangerous for me to say yes. In some cases, yes, but in some cases, there may be more money programmed than what we need, but in a lot of cases, we need more money than has been programmed. So,
If it's a significant difference, would you mind highlighting that when you go through the list, just like say?
and I'll defer to project managers on some of these, but I think we're pretty much on target with the multimodal path. We won't do more than what we have available. The Legacy Trail Extension, the same thing. 36th Avenue, the utility relocation part is okay, but the project as a whole, I think we'll need some assistance from some funding from other sources, or perhaps some savings in other bond projects that we have talked about might be transferred to that project.
Councilmember Wilson and then Councilmember Holman.
So I have some questions about the multimodal project on Highway 9 between 36th and 48th. Is that, I don't know what my question is exactly. Is that a bond?
That is an ODOT, what they call Transportation Enhancement Grant Program. Council
so-
just accepted that at
Okay.
your last council meeting.
Because I was gonna say that it seems like something like that could be postponed in theory, because we really don't have the use out there yet. But if it's a grant, I don't want to postpone it because I don't want to lose that grant.
That 1,045,000, you're matching about 445,000 against a $600,000 grant. In order to get the grant, we've got to have the match, and we've got to build it this year. So that's why it's in the pipeline.
Okay.
It's grant driven, you're right.
Well, I don't want to lose the grant, so never mind.
Councilmember Holman?
So the municipal complex renovation, I know the 2008 bond was 11.2 million. And I know that we do need more than, we've talked about it in recent months, about the extent of the renovations that we need to do, police department and with the other buildings.
This building.
In this building too. I forget what the number was. I think it was around 15 or 16 maybe.
I don't think it's that much. Now, remember, there's some of the funds that have already been spent this fiscal year on the design. But yes, we do anticipate that there will be a shortfall above $1 to $2 million, something in that range, to do all of the projects in municipal complex. So we'll talk about how much of the shortfalls there are and try to put numbers to them next week. But yes, we do know that there's a shortfall.
And the Legacy Trail extension, that's also a bond, or not, yeah. That's a grant
That's
given too.
That's a Norman Forward project, actually.
Oh, right, yeah.
24th to 36th.
24th Northwest and 36th Northwest, yeah. Okay.
Is that the
Which one are we on? 24th?
Legacy Trail.
Legacy Trail?
Also a grant.
Yeah,
It's
it's
also the Transportation Enhancement Program and also 600,000 of federal funds matched with local capital funds.
So I knew part of Legacy Trail projects were in Norman Ford, but I did think this one was a grant.
Right. This is really filling in those gaps.
Yeah, right,
on
those two.
24th Avenue Northwest and 36th in order to get us ultimately to Ruby Grant Park.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Scanlon?
As I look at that, I take it as interesting information. But it would be a mistake to think that we can mine these projects to spend other places, because they're either grants or they're projects funded by bonds, and the bonds insist that you spend that money on that project. If there's money left over, you can spend it on another related bond project. But this is not a
It's not a-
panacea for anything.
No, sir, no. You can only use capital project money for capital projects. You can only use general obligation bond money for the projects that you told the voters you were going to do. So no, it's not like the general fund that you can fungibly move the money around. You really can't do that here. The Flood Avenue sidewalk project is ongoing from Gray to Acres. The Porter Avenue streetscape project and the Porter and Acres intersection will be underway. I think you're going to have a design contract for that on next meeting. The Jenkins Avenue bond project will start next fiscal year. And the Brook sidewalk, Councilmember Holman's baby,
Yes.
from the railroad tracks to Classen Boulevard will be ongoing next year.
If I may,
Councilmember Holman?
it's the only railroad crossing, well, Constitution is going to be done through a bond project, but this is the only railroad crossing in the urbanized area of Norman that does not have sidewalks crossing it on either side. All of the other crossings do, except for this one.
So we should
Seems like an important one too,
Yeah. It's in
with all the students.
Ward 4
down
and
there.
it's in Ward 4 and 7. It's right on the line there.
The Hall-Holman
Thank you.
crossing.
Good job.
Yes.
Before you move on, the discussion about the municipal complex renovation is much more significant. I think Anthony might be referring to an older number, but we needed about another, to do all of the renovations, about another 11 million.
Oh, God.
So what was the total on that?
Altogether, about 21. Now, this money, bond money itself, can only be used in certain buildings. The Development Center, Building A, and a very small piece of Building B. So it could not be used for these other buildings anyway. But, I mean, we would have always had this fund that through capital funds. And so, since this is a long ongoing project, you know, you have to do one building before you can do the next, and it dominoes. In out years, we'll be trying to budget for the other buildings in capital fund. This will do almost get us through the development center and municipal court. So it's close.
Councilman Holman?
So these funds can't be used for the police department stuff?
They can.
But there's not enough to do that, the development center and,
There was originally only about
Municipal court.
300,000 included in that 08 bond language for the police department, because it was only to remodel that area that the court was vacating.
oh, right.
And since
That's
we've
just a
updated
corner.
the overall study and for what the needs are going forward, now that Building B is projected to touch every inch of it. So it's up to like now 3-point-something million.
I mean, I would agree that if you haven't been in there, I would say the whole building does need a massive renovation, so. And the basement will be vacated also when the 911 center moves out of it, so. I guess they're wanting to put an elevator in there for ADA accessibility down there, from what I understand, maybe there already is, I don't know, but there's not already, I think there. So yeah, I was under the impression that it was a lot more.
I just didn't want to, after Councilmember Patron's comment, I didn't want to go forward.
Well, and this building is the newest of all of them, but even this building is 21 years old now, so it's has issues. I know it's had issues almost since it was first built, and space issues are a real deal in this building. So I just wanted thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, just a lot has changed since 2008. I
Yeah.
mean, you know,
Yeah.
there was no Norman Investigation Center, there was no Public Safety Sales Tax, Emergency Operations Center, where the dispatchers are moving to. So yeah, it's a whole nother plan now. So.
Before we move on, Mr. O'Leary, can you give us a quick update on the ACOG funding and just more like a timeline? Because I know we don't have any responses on that yet.
We were hoping to have some results now, but it's been postponed until early March for the release of the project ranking results. You know, we compete with 42 other municipalities or agencies in the Oklahoma City metropolitan area, so we think it's March 11th will be the date of the release. The staff there are playing it pretty close to the vest. They're not releasing any advance information. We feel really good about our applications. We worked very hard. We submitted 20 project applications over a 4-year period, so we'll see the full 4 years in ranking, but they only, like Anthony said, they only lock that first year. So the lock that we're shooting for is Robinson I-35 is our #1 project. We think James Garner Phase 2 is going to do well, and we think 36 Avenue Northwest is going to do well. And those are our priorities established by council.
And the ranking process has changed from last year.
It has. We think many of the concerns from last year have been repaired. That's part of the question of the results. How's it going to come out? We feel really good about that. But we don't know what others have submitted. And we just mentioned for the first time ever, we are entering the transit part of the ACOG funding. We've never been able to do that, so we are applying for funding for another bus as well. So that's also in the mix of the ranking process.
Okay, Councilor Scott?
Another bus in the ranking process. It's cool if that can happen.
Yeah, they added transit just a couple of years ago to the eligible project submittals.
Okay, and my question was, I think last year we received you gave us like a chart of all of the ranked projects, and I thought that was pretty neat and how that kind of went down. Of course, it did not go our way, or in my opinion, our way, last year. So I wonder if we're going to receive another update of that chart this year, or would it be after the 11th?
We would be happy to do that, Councilmember. In fact, we'd like to do it on the 11th. As soon as we get
Okay.
the results, we're going to ship it out to you all, of course, with the key outcomes for this year. But we refer to that as the rainbow chart because Angela uses lots of different colors.
Yeah, yes.
But yes, we'll ship that out to you probably as early as a day or two after that
Okay.
event, and you'll see all 4 years of how we think we ranked. Again, every year is a new process, but we do submit for 4 years of project eligibility.
Councilor Wilson?
So on the bus, would that be a replacement bus?
That would be a replacement bus for one of our large fixed route buses, the
large.
35-footers. So we would be competing with COTPA or Embark, our partner here. They too would be applying for bus funding as well. So we'll see how it comes out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So here's some information on projects that are ongoing. Just some nice pictures of some of the street maintenance bond projects that are either nearing completion or have been completed. The 24th Avenue East widening project that I think everybody is familiar with is well under construction. I think we're on schedule to have it completed sometime in the fall.
In the fall?
Sorry, Councilmember Holman?
Yeah, I just wanted to get a clarification on that it's two-phase project, and I think originally it was gonna be constructed separately, but it's only budgeted in 2 phases, but it's being constructed all at once.
Yes, sir. It's all under construction. You'll see activity on the entire 2 miles today. I think Mr. Sturts can confirm. But yeah, we were able to match or tie the 2 projects into one bid opening and do the construction in one phase.
I think that's great.
And
Councilmember Wilson?
the whole project will be done by the fall?
Yes.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Wow.
we're on schedule.
I told my
Good,
husband this like
pray for
2
good
years
weather
out.
this construction season, but we're shooting for
Cool.
early fall of this year.
Yeah. Drove it just this weekend, so.
I drove it.
And I'd be remiss if I, just from a budgetary standpoint, didn't mention just the magical things that Sean and Angelo do to split up those projects to get the maximum amount of matching money that we can get. And they really do a good job of that. And Norman has been the envy of all the other cities in the ACOG metro area for a long time,
Yeah.
to our own detriment, to the point that, you know, the other cities are copying what we do now. So the competition is very fierce for those dollars. The 36th Avenue project, again, is one of those matching projects. It's 2 lanes, 2 miles of paving and widening. It'll improve the access to Ruby Grant Park. We hope to have a decision about the scheduling of that project again on March the 12th. Councilmember Scott's bonus baby, the I-35 and Robinson project.
Every Ward 8 council.
Again, we hope to hear on March the 12th that we will be awarded federal matching funds for that in this coming federal fiscal year, such that we could begin, that ACOG would be taking, or rather ODOT would be taking bids sometime this fall. So hopefully the construction of that project will be ongoing very soon. You've seen the utility relocation for that project over the last year or two, and we hope to make these improvements really soon.
Thank you.
The ongoing projects of the ODOT for along Highway 9, you see are kind of phased out here. The next phase is 36th to 72nd. And then after that will be 72nd to 108th. It's just kind of progressing from west to east along Highway 9.
Councilmember Holman?
I know we haven't been able to do the multimodal path at the same time on their previous projects. Since these are a couple years out, these other phases, are we anticipating we might be able to do the multimodal path at the same time that they're widening?
It's a great question, because we're trying. We're certainly coordinating on the design. We've got a good relationship with ODOT to use part of the right-of-way for the project. But you'll notice the previous mention, council just approved the path from 36 to 48, and that road widening's already been done. So we're going to be trailing, I think, right behind the highway improvements. Minor correction to Anthony's comment, the next phase is actually 72nd to 108th. And these are done in federal fiscal cycles because they're done by the DOT. That would translate to the fall of 21. So we're about a year and a half away from moving that next 3-mile section. But,
And I guess the multimodal path is only going to 72nd, right?
well, yeah, we 72nd is kind of the bullseye to get off into the 10-mile or the Dave Blue Creek corridor into the lake area. But we anticipate taking the path all the way to the east city limits someday.
Okay.
We hope that
Well, it'd be
that's the
nice
goal.
on that 2025 phase and 2027 phase. If we can
You bet.
do them at the same time. That'd be cool. Thank you.
The Porter Avenue and Acres intersection project that we talked about, funded by the 2019 general obligation bonds. And we anticipate, because there's no matching money for this one, construction to be starting in the next few months. So you have a design contract for that coming up on next council meeting. And I think it'll be about 9 months to do the design, and then construction will start soon after that.
I have a quick question on that one, and it's regarding the design. It's not on our iPads yet, so I don't think we've had a chance to see it.
Correct.
I selfishly will ask this question from a personal perspective because I drive down Porter every day to go to work. Is it going to remain open during this process?
Yes.
Just go to one to one?
You bet, Mary. It'll be tricky, like every corridor like that. It's carrying about 20,000 cars a day, so it'll be a tricky construction zone. But one lane will always be open in each direction.
Okay.
We'll do, the first project is the one shown here at Porter and Acres, and the Porter streetscape corridor will follow about a year after that. So it'll be done in phases for that reason, to be able to maintain traffic. We want to make sure the businesses aren't hurt during the construction process. So, but this intersection is kind of the trickiest part of the whole program. It's a little bit,
How far
as you
south
know,
is
it's an
that
odd
from?
intersection.
Not quite to Alameda.
The streetscape actually would go ideally from Robinson to Alameda, depending on how far the money can stretch, but certainly Robinson South is kind of the focus. We were talking this morning as a staff, we'd like to bring back a study session for council. We had a nice session with Councilmember Hall last week to talk about some of our design concepts, so maybe in about 30 days we'd love to visit with you about kind of the design elements, timing. But Anthony's right, this project is targeted for a June bid opening.
Yep. Councilmember Hall?
And I think the photograph that's shown up here, there's still, we're not quite where we need to be on the
You bet.
cul-de-sac, right?
We debated over which one to put up. This was
Okay.
the one that was in your bond election in April, so we felt like we probably should stay true to our public information. But as Councilmember Hall's mentioning, that cul-de-sac there on Dawes is moving around, and we're being very careful to try to coordinate with the adjacent businesses and try to reduce as much as we can any of the takings of rights of way and buildings. There is one building that we're having to acquire outright, which is the pet groomer there on the corner.
And council recently approved the Vans Pig Stand
Yes.
and a ingress egress plan and new parking in the back. So there are pieces you've already seen.
Which helps with this.
I would just mention, this is the first of your 2019 bond program, so it's exciting that, within a year of approval of the voters, we're actually going to be under construction, which is what we committed to do when that went to the voters.
Speaking of that, it's the first of the 2019, City Manager Pyle was talking about how we don't really, you may have seen it with the Norman Public Schools, they put a sign up so you know that your tax dollars are paying for it. We have not done that until hopefully recently, which I think is going to be very important to remind that this wouldn't happen without the support of residents. So I appreciate you bringing that back. Councilmember Scanlon.
Sean, I think I've heard from a Ward 4 constituent, but somebody that talks to everybody, that there are sidewalk issues related to these intersections as well. Now, am I imagining that?
Certainly, sidewalks and accessibility is a high priority for this project and the entire corridor. Not aware of any immediate concern. There's a fair amount. I'd encourage you maybe to drive out as you go out from this meeting. Porter Avenue is an old highway
do drive
corridor, and lots of businesses have been parking out in the right-of-way and over the sidewalk for many years. That won't be allowed when we get these sidewalks improved here. So we do have some businesses who are having to reorient their private parking spaces to make sure that they don't block the sidewalks.
But I'd heard sidewalk issues and crosswalk issues at the specific intersection.
Yeah, that's really
what
a
you're
priority of
addressing.
this. Pedestrian safety is key. Just without getting too far in the weeds, one of the concepts early on in the Porter corridor was a roundabout here, and council opted not to go that direction. So we're going with the conventional signalized intersection.
One of the sidewalk objections comes from my barber, who tells me if I don't fix it, I can't go there anymore.
Okay.
Consider it fixed.
Councilmember Holman.
I would have preferred the roundabout, to be honest, but traffic lights are the biggest cause of traffic congestion, and they're where the most fatal accidents happen, from what I understand, are at signalized intersections. So I wanted the roundabout, but we're not going that way. That's fine. But the cul-de-sac.
Not bitter.
I really dislike the cul-de-sac. I understand why it's necessary, but it's so out of character for this part of town for there to be a cul-de-sac on a street. I don't know if there's some other designs or whatever we're gonna look at, but if there's anything we could do with it to make it not just be a giant circle of concrete off of our brand new nice Porter corridor that we're gonna redo, like paint a happy face on it.
Public art, public art. I like
Something,
that.
anything to, it just, I think a big giant concrete circle is going to stand out along there, and not a positive way, in my opinion. So, thank you.
Councilmember Hall?
There's supposed to be some green space built in, and surprisingly, there's a lot of neighborhood support for closing that street.
Yeah, I think it needs to happen to accommodate that intersection and make it safer.
I get you.
Yeah.
There you go. All right. Thank you.
The Jenkins Avenue widening project from Lindsay down to Inhofe will be under design. Obviously a very needed project. It's hopefully the timing will coincide with the construction at Reeves Park. But obviously it's a very needed project that'll be ongoing.
Councilmember Holman?
Just to be clear, we're the start of that project, we're thinking this year.
Looking to start
Builds water lines right now.
Start maybe spring of next, maybe a year from now or so.
probably spring of 21.
Do we know the phasing or anything? We're gonna start on what end?
Still
or-
pretty early on the design, just started the design process, but that's another one we'd like to bring back to council at least once, and probably a public session at least once before we get too deep into the final design.
And anything new on the realignment part?
Nothing but good news. OU is cooperating well. They're interested in it. Obviously, it may change with the dialogue on the senior center, but still that realignment is important to the corridor.
And the utility relocation is already underway.
Yeah, already doing water line relocation, well into design. Scott's got a great working group with the OU folks, so the project's going well.
Yeah, you mentioned spring, that's right by our softball stadium, but then in the fall, it leads up to our football stadium, so there will
Still good
be no
times.
good time for that project. So at least you don't gotta worry about that, right? Just do it.
This actually is a slide I was looking for a moment ago when you were talking about the Legacy Trail project, but this shows the Dave Blue Creek extension that Sean was talking about. So that'll be ongoing.
Nice.
Legacy Trail extension, 24th Avenue to 36th. Again, this is in large part within University North Park on the east side of 24th Avenue. So it'll connect those trails that are in place and then to the Rock Creek overpass, which is really part of Legacy Trail. Projects within the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund. And again, you'll recall that when the Public Safety Sales Tax 2 was passed, there were critical capital needs that were to be funded out of the Public Safety Sales Tax 2. The largest of them is the emergency radio communication system that has now been replaced. I think the go-live date is very soon. Chief is here if he wants to speak to that. We're in final design on the Emergency Communications Center on East Robinson. The fire apparatus program, there's an annual program that we'll talk about here in a moment. That's one of the critical capital needs. But we would point out that as engineering has progressed on the Emergency Operations Center, there's also an identified shortfall in funding for that project. The Public Safety Sales Tax Oversight Committee has been talking about that, how the project might be cut back to fit back within its budget, and what would have to be given up to do that, what is acceptable, what may not be acceptable to get the project back within its budget, but we're progressing with the design.
Councilmember Wilson?
Don't cut my fire station.
The last of the critical capital need projects is the reconstruction of Fire Station 5, and it will be done.
Where's that on here?
It's not on.
Not on this slide.
2025 is the
It's never
anticipated
on the
date.
slide. That's why I have to keep reminding.
So here's the fire apparatus replacement schedule that we have, at least right now. in next fiscal year. There's $800,000 allocated for that continuation program. I believe that's a fire pumper truck next fiscal year. Chief may correct me if I'm wrong.
May I make a point on this slide?
Councilmember
Because
Scanlon.
I've been following this for a number of years, first on the Public Safety Committee and now here. I have to call out kudos to the Fire Chief for completely redoing the allocation of apparatus, taking advantage of the adage of water east, ladders west, and putting smaller trucks but more capable trucks on the east side, cutting the budget in the process in the sense that we're not buying some big things that we may not need, but investing in the pumper tankers as an example. And you can see by the budget versus actual that we're saving money at virtually every turn. Kudos to the chief.
Second that.
Really taking this seriously.
Thanks, Chief.
Every one of them is a savings.
Good job.
Want some pizza? Okay.
Norman Ford is again a big part of our capital program. Here are some projects that have been completed in this fiscal year. The spectacular Central Branch Library, the Westwood Tennis Center, the renovation of Prairie Creek Park, and the construction of the Songbird Park, as it's now called, Cedar Lake Park, as I know it. So
Where's Songbird Park?
it's South Central Norman.
Cedar Lane.
Cedar Lane neighborhood in Ward 7. In the Cedar Lane neighborhood next to Eagle Cliff.
Oh, okay.
Thought you'd say Ward 7.
It is in Ward 7,
Here are some Norman
Got new
Ford
parking
projects that
lots.
are still underway. The Andrews Park improvements for the skate park are about to bid. The Griffin Park remodel is ongoing. Council just awarded another phase of those construction projects. The Indoor Aquatic Center and the Indoor Multi-Sport Facility, University North Park, are under design. The Community Sports Park on Franklin Road is also under design. Some phases of Reeves Park have been completed and it is in final design. The neighborhood park improvements are on the schedule that has been presented to the Park Commission and forwarded to council. South Lake Park is under construction, I believe, or will be soon. Ruby Grant Park is under development and it's starting to come out of the ground right now. The James Garner project, you'll have a design contract for that, both for the final design of Phase 2, which is connecting the library part to Flood Avenue, and then a project that is funded by bonds from Acres south to Duffy. Now, that's not a Norman Forward project, but it will connect with this project. And then the Senior Wellness Center is ongoing in design. Upcoming next fiscal year,
Councilmember Wilson?
Oh, I kind of jumped the gun, but I want to know a little more about Saxon Park development and what we're going to do out there, what the plan is.
that is Phase 1 of the Saxon Park development. I believe it's trails and parking. The park director may.
First things we'll do is finish the road that goes up to connect to the land west of there and build another identical part of parking off that road on the west side of that road, and then playground, restrooms, and a large tournament hosting pavilion so we can have cross country out there, that type of stuff.
Oh, okay.
So
Signage? Wayfinding signs? Is that part of it? That was really my.
yes, to get like sort of a "You Are Here" trailhead sign.
Yeah, the trailhead sign's completely gone,
Right.
and
We're-
the posts are knocked over. And
We
Yeah.
saw a couple of those. Someone turned those in, not in the room. Some staff member was out there last week and sent me a picture of a couple. So we have that on our docket to reset the signs that are knocked over and to get a new "You Are Here" trailhead sign over to, what are they calling that signs now? The company that makes signs here. Fast signs. So we're working that issue right now, but the bigger ticket stuff is,
so the important thing I heard there was bathrooms.
yes.
I'm just saying. Okay, thanks.
Some of these Norman Forward projects we've already talked about, but some of these that were programmed for fiscal year 21 are recommended to be changed, at least by the Citizen Financial Oversight Board. You'll recall that we're trying to save on the interest cost and cut back on the amount of debt financing that we do. In order to do that, we have pushed back the trail development project, so there probably won't be $2.5 million in next year's budget for that. There'll be just the portion for the trail project along Flood Avenue, but a lot of that trail money will be pushed back. The programming for the Senior Wellness Center, you'll recall that there was about $760,000 in this fiscal year's budget for the design, and then the construction is split out over the next 2 fiscal years, and that's still our plan for that project. The 5-year street maintenance bond program, and again, these are the street resurfacing projects in neighborhoods throughout the city. A lot of them have been completed, and in a lot of the cases, and where we're giving pats on the back again, Mr. Mensah and a lot of the folks who have been overseeing those projects have done a great job, and they are coming in well under budget. And when I tell you that, you know, the 36th Avenue project, that is a bond project, may need some additional funds, the source of those additional funds may be savings from these projects. So again, the streets are getting done, they're getting done under budget, and related projects, as Councilmember Scanlon says, street maintenance, street bonds will be the Alameda project, eventually, and the 36th Avenue project, where some of these funds may be used and transferred once the projects have been completed.
Councilmember Holman.
Just want to mention that this particular program that we have is different than the big road widening and improvement bond that we did like last April. This one has been going on for, I forget, over 20 years.
This is the third renewal.
And it's really only neighborhood streets primarily that get replaced, and so it's been extremely popular, and in my experience, the projects have generally come in under budget, and they're the streets that people, you know, right outside your house, so it's really made a difference, especially in older parts of the city, being able to systematically replace all the neighborhood streets like that. It's been popular, and it looks like we'll probably be putting one out there again probably at the end of next year, it looks like.
And that's why, as you see, these are 5-year bonds. It's the useful life of a resurfaced street is short of the useful life of a newly constructed or widened street. So a widened street or a newly constructed street, you might have a general obligation bond that's paid off in 20 years, matching the longer useful life. In this case, it's a resurfaced street, so the bond term is shorter. So in Norman Forward, well, we touched on this, but there are some issues. First, sales tax revenues, and where we're having this problem in the general fund, we're having the same problem in the Norman Forward Fund. We're having the same problem in the public safety sales tax fund. This gets back to those mega trends that we've talked about. But sales tax isn't growing at its historic rate. And for that reason, everything that we're depending on sales tax for, including these capital projects in Norman Forward and in the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund, that shortfall gives us less revenue to pay for those projects that we've wanted to do and that the voters wanted to have done and that we promised to get done. So we have these project cost overruns in addition to the shortfall of sales tax revenue. The Financial Oversight Board has talked about how to handle that. The ad hoc groups are talking about how to handle that for their individual projects. But generally speaking, some things that we've talked about, at least at the Financial Oversight Board level, again, is to do more pay-as-you-go projects, less debt financing, so that we can save on some of the interest costs. We estimate that by reducing the amount of the upcoming issuance of debt for Norman Forward, we can save about $2.5 million in interest costs over the projections that we had when Norman Forward was originally approved. We want to use any project savings that we have to pay for the future projects that have not been done yet. So again, where there might be, for example, some savings on the Central Library project, we would not recommend, at least from this Financial Oversight Board level, and you've seen this recommendation from them repeatedly, that you not increase the budget for any projects with those savings. In order to, with the shortfall of sales tax revenue, in order to pay for all of the projects that we have promised to our voters to do, we want to, those future projects where there are savings in a project now, send it back to fund balance to pay for the projects that we've not done yet. So that at least is a recommendation from the Financial Oversight Board. We'll continue to try to get additional funding. The Highway Administration funding, or matching funding for the James Garner project, we hope will come in. In the ordinance that council approved for the amendments to the University TIF project plan, there were supplemental funds for the indoor aquatic facility and indoor multi-sport facility in that agreement, or in that ordinance. We'll continue to try to do that sort of thing in the future. We'll try to get private funds for some of these projects, and that's ongoing. And we might supplement some of the Norman Forward funds from the capital fund. But again, as we know, the capital fund has its own issues. But those are things that we'll be looking forward to for Norman Forward going forward. The 2012 Transportation Bond Program is ongoing and will be ongoing for several years to come. We know about the 24th Avenue project that's ongoing now. The next one will be the 36th Avenue project, and after that will be the Alameda project. The city's portion, as you see there on the left, and the full cost on the right. The 2019 Transportation Bond Program, as we talked about, the Porter Avenue projects are the first ones to come. The Jenkins Avenue project will be after that, and I think we're still on schedule for all of these projects that you see there. Again, Sean and Angelo and the folks in Public Works do a great job of getting matching money for these projects. Fiscal year 20 was a down year for the reasons that Councilmember Scott talked about. But again, we hope that that'll be a comeback in next fiscal year. And for the next few years, we should score very well if they don't change the formula again.
I feel like there's a pattern there. Every 5 years we have a dip, so nowhere to go but up. Feeling pretty excited about it.
One thing that we want to talk about and stress is the condition of the city's bridges. We allocate some money each year for bridge maintenance, and basically it's $100,000 a year for the most dire where the bridge is just falling down. But we need to do a better job of maintaining our bridges. We have 77 bridges in our system. As you see there, 20 of them are older than me. I almost said older though. Anyway, I'll leave that alone. And a lot of them are structurally deficient. We need to just give some consideration to our bridge program. And again, if the bridge is out, we can't get to you. And these bridges are in critical locations throughout the city. Here are some projects that we know that we need to do, that we don't have money to do. The red ones are the ones that are really, really bad, and we don't have money to address them. But as you see, there are red dots all over town. We need to allocate more money to bridge maintenance. Some of the bridges are structurally deficient, which means that they can't handle loads that would be like a school bus or something like that. And so certain vehicles can't pass over those bridges. We need to spend more money on our bridge program. Here's some projects that are proposed to be included in our bridge program going forward. And I think these are just prioritized based on those emergency situations that were talked about. And I'll defer to the folks, project managers from Public Works, to talk about them and why these are given the highest priority. But these are just proposals for where we might allocate funds going forward. We talked about what we need. Here's what we're proposing to have. So again, we don't have enough money to maintain our bridges. We need to do a better job. We need to find more money to do a better job of our bridge maintenance program. We need to do a better job of allocating funds to replacing our vehicle fleet. Council's been talking about this for years. We did a professional consultant study that said that we need to be spending about $4.5 million a year on vehicle replacements. Within our dedicated capital sales tax, we don't have enough money to replace the vehicles that we need to be replacing. And again, these are just the vehicles that the Fleet Maintenance Division has identified as being critical, the things that are more expensive to maintain than they would be to replace. 2005, 2007 vehicles that are 12, 15 years old.
Councilman Patron.
Does that number include the newly acquired buses that are problematic?
No. This same pot of money, at this point at least, would be going toward replacing buses.
Okay.
In the room tax fund, and you'll recall that by ordinance, the room tax of 5%, half of the funds are dedicated for attracting visitors to Norman. We contract with the Visit Norman agency for that part. 25% is for arts and humanities, and we contract with the Norman Arts Council for that part. And then 25% is for park development projects. So this is a part of the room tax that is for capital projects. In fiscal year 21, we're proposing to use those funds to match funds for the addition to the Firehouse Art Center and to resurface and improve the parking lot at the Historical Museum. We have been paying the debt service on the golf course improvement bonds for 18 or 19 years now, and those bonds will be paid off on June 1st of 2022, and that will free up this portion of the room tax fund for more park development projects.
Councilmember Holman.
How much is that debt service a year?
It's about $120,000 a year.
So how much would that last bullet point be?
It would free up about $120,000 a year for other park development projects.
So we only owe $125,000 left.
We have about 2 more years of debt service to pay. I can look up the actual number, but it's about $230,000 that's remaining. Right at 200. Here are some upcoming projects that are proposed to be done in fiscal year 21. We talked about the Robinson I-35 project. We talked about the 36th and Jenkins projects. The Constitution multimodal path that Councilmember Holman touched on is proposed to go forward next fiscal year, and the James Garner project that we touched on. We dedicate about $370,000 a year to various sidewalk-related programs. That's proposed to continue in next fiscal year. This is a good look at the recurring programs in the capital sales tax that we do, or at least propose to do in next fiscal year. Doesn't mean we have to. Okay, but again, there have been really good reasons that we have allocated that capital sales tax based on those guidelines in these areas. $3.8 million roughly would go towards capital outlay projects by that guideline formula that we have. But again, and about half of that money goes to vehicle replacements, $2 million roughly. We know that that's not enough. We have about $8 million worth of critical vehicle replacement needs that we have. And we have about $2 million to address that. But council may say, we're not going to do any capital outlay next year. We're not going to replace any computers. We're not going to replace any vehicles. And then there'd be about $3.8 million that we would have available for other capital needs. We may choose to not do any street maintenance projects next year. That would free up about $2.3 million plus some funds in that personnel category that you see. A lot of that personnel category is that the capital fund pays for a lot of the street maintenance division employees that are working on capital projects in the street maintenance area. So we might just decide to not do any projects. We would either assign those personnel to other duties or hold the positions vacant if they are vacant and save that money. And again, I'm not recommending any of this. I'm just saying that those are options that council could consider. We may decide to not do any stormwater projects next fiscal year. That would free up about $765,000. So again, these are some things that by that formula we would program into next year's budget, but council may decide to not follow that guideline next year.
It would seem like if we cut some things per the status of a lot of our bridges, we should move it as opposed to cut it to the bridge maintenance area. Do we have any current requests for traffic calming? Because I know we cut that in a recent year, and then Ward 6, when I was still representing Ward 6, had a request for traffic calming.
None that we're aware of, Mayor, but we get inquiries pretty frequently, but no active petitions that I'm aware of.
Nothing moving along the process where it looks like it could solidify like the
Not
other
this
one
time.
did?
And again, that's not uncommon for that to happen, and in that case, those funds just aren't spent and they go back to the fund balance of the capital fund.
I'm going to find 7 traffic lights. May I?
Yes, Councilmember Scanlon.
I understand what Anthony said about he's not recommending anything, but as we look at these things and consider them, some of them have significant penalties for not doing it. It's not just a bridge situation. For example, the things relating to stormwater and TDMLs. We're on waivers now for meeting certain requirements, and the penalties, should that waiver be canceled, are significant, like 10 grand a day per incident. I mean, it becomes a really big deal.
No, thank you for
So we
pointing
have
that
to
out.
be careful what we do.
We do. Councilmember Patron.
Really quickly, but on the Norman Forward, when is the third round of borrowing supposed to be taking place, and should we consider that as pay-go?
Well, no. In order to get the projects done on their schedules, we do need to do that third bond financing. We're about to run out of money in the second financing that we did, and we still have a lot of the brick and mortar projects that we anticipated doing, like the multi-sport and aquatic center, out of that third financing. So we're still budgeted to have the funds from that third financing in this fiscal year. So closing the financing by June 30th.
And how much will that be?
The current estimate is somewhere around $26 million, whereas it was originally programmed to be about $34 million.
Okay, and how many projects does it cover?
All of the projects in Norman Forward are authorized to be paid for out of those financings, but this one is primarily for the indoor aquatic center and the indoor multi-sport center. The sizing of those is based on the budgets for those projects.
So the other projects are pay-go, and those two are bond?
A lot of the projects, and their council has approved what projects would be paid for on a debt basis versus a pay-as-you-go basis. But all of the projects, the major projects that have been done so far, the library projects, the Westwood projects, Griffin Park, Reeves Park so far, those are all bond projects. Those are all debt financed.
Right, but my question is, you said that the 26 million third bond allocation is going towards the multi-sport.
Primarily.
So will the other projects that are happening simultaneously be PAYGO?
There are some projects, the neighborhood park projects are pay-as-you-go.
Reeves?
No, Reeves Park is a note finance project.
So how far out does that put, if all of the third round bonds go just towards the multi-sport and aquatics, how long would Reeves, for instance, need to wait if they're a bond project?
No, that's the reason that you do that financing, is that you don't have to wait until the funds come in. So no, Reeves is ongoing now out of notes
Yeah,
that we
I know
issued.
that portion is, but I guess my question is, so you would just so I understand how it works, like if you wanted to go ahead and get started on another expensive project, you issue the third one, which is 26 million, then the next day you could issue a fourth one against it as well?
No, because there's a limit to how much debt you can issue. These are revenue bonds, and so
Right.
you have to have revenue to pay back the debt.
So therefore, you would need to wait before you could issue the fourth bond for the next big project, since the 26 million of the third is all going to those projects.
But the 60 million that has already been issued has paid for a lot of the projects that have already been done or that are already under construction. I would refer you to the Financial Oversight Board's annual report that you got that you approved in the last meeting. In that annual report is the pro forma analysis that shows to you which projects are debt financed and which are pay-as-you-go, and the timing for the pay-as-you-go projects. Earlier when I was talking about how we're proposing to delay the Trails project because we're debt financing less, that's that balancing act that we're doing to make sure that we have enough funds to do the pay-as-you-go projects out of money that is coming in versus the projects that we want to have upfront financing for to move those projects forward. And that was always the plan with Norman Forward.
Okay, so two-part question now, what would the interest be on 26 million, and then where are we gonna get the other 25 million to finish the project? Isn't it right around 56 million now, the aquatic center and the multi-sport?
Yeah, the Norman Forward financing is only anticipating the budget for those projects. If there is additional funding needs for those projects, there may need to be another source of funding, and we'll talk about that later in the presentation.
Okay, and the interest on 26 million?
Roughly 4 million. It's a fairly short financing, 11 years.
The next slide before you get to the vineyard, stop, because I have to recuse myself from that discussion.
You good, Councilmember? You can come back later.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'd be glad to, we really need to answer your question in detail. We really need to look at that analysis that you got last meeting and look at it in some detail to talk about the projects that are in green. These are pay-as-you-go. And when council awards those projects, you'll see a NFP, Norman Forward Pay-as-you-Go. The projects that are debt financed, you'll see a NFB, Norman Forward Bond Financed.
Just so I understand the process, though, we wouldn't issue debt, a bond, $26 million bond debt, when we don't know how we're going to pay for the other half of it, correct? We're not just going to build half a building. And
Correct.
thank you. Okay, that makes me feel a little better.
So we have some upcoming challenges in our capital program. The I-35 corridor study is ongoing. We're partnering with Department of Transportation and with the City of Moore. The Regional Transit Authority that Council has talked about, there will be forthcoming from that entity that is separate from the city, potential sales tax proposal to finance regional transit in the future. For our local transit authority, however, we have some challenges. We talked about the need to replace our bus fleet that is in the same pot of money competing for that capital sales tax vehicle replacement fund. We need to build a bus transfer station. We need to build a bus maintenance facility. We thought we would get some money back from OU, but we're probably not going to. So we need to identify a source of revenue for those things. We have traffic signal needs throughout town that are unaddressed at this point. We talked about the fleet replacement. In the future, we're going to need to build a new fire station in south central Norman, southeast Norman. That will be a capital project as well as an operating concern for the general fund. These Norman Forward projects, and again, I am just pointing out here that there are, as we've moved forward with the engineering designs, potential and probable shortfalls between the budget that Norman Forward has for those projects and the updated engineering estimates to complete those projects. And we'll talk more next week about what we might do about that. But we've listed out some projects we've identified within Norman Forward, and the municipal complex is down here, and bridge replacement is down here, where we have the potential need for additional funding that we'll talk in more detail next week.
Councilmember Wilson.
Backing up a little bit, parking study in downtown and Campus Corner. Is that, didn't we do a parking study, or are you saying following the parking study?
I think it is.
We did one, Councilmember, and we partnered with Cleveland County, completed that last year, and the reason we listed that here was this reference to the concept of a parking and transit authority. This council has been debating this for a number of years, whether we should have a parking authority, a trust, if you will, similar to COTPA in Oklahoma City. And now that we are in the transit business, maybe that's something more even worthy of discussion.
But we're not suggesting we do another study, or?
No, it's done, and the
Okay.
study recommended that the city and the county enter into an agreement and develop a parking and transit authority. That was actually before we took over the transit system. So anyway, we listed here just as something that council has pursued and showed interest in, but there's really no activity right at the present moment.
City Manager Pyle?
And Sean, just a quick question, timing of the RTA conversation and the recommendations from the parking study, they may not have been done with each other in mind, I'm assuming?
To some degree, yes, but no, they were sort of far-sighted in terms of the RTA, but you're right, that when the discussion of the parking authority was started, it was really about parking, and then it sort of became about parking and transit, and then later we started to think, well, maybe it can be parking, transit, and commuter rail. So you're right, that it's sort of evolved over these recent years.
Councilmember Holman.
Sorry.
Sorry. The first time I think I've seen the 7 million for 35 intersections, traffic signals. We talk about that just briefly.
Sure, happy to. And we've been carrying this item. This is really focused on our state highway system and many of our major arterials. As you know, we have challenges with our state highways, certainly Highway 9 and US Highway 77 through the middle of Norman. We don't own those highways. We can't initiate projects on those highways. We beg and beg for ODOT to do them, and they just never quite get around to it. So many of the $7 million in projection, is on 12th Street, Tecumseh Road, and Highway 9.
I was getting ready to say at least once a semester, I think, I get from parents trying to turn into Eisenhower and panicking and frustrated and angry and.
Absolutely. 12th and High Meadows is a priority.
That's what I was gonna say.
Plassen and.
Ann Brandon.
Ann Brandon would be a
Is that,
second
are
priority.
those included in this
We
cost?
think Ann Brandon is well on its way to being solved by ODOT and then literally this year, so we're feeling better about that. We're not seeing movement on 12th and High Meadows, but I think council's aware that ODOT has kind of softly suggested this year that they dedicate the entire highway system to us. That is 8 miles of multi-lane highway that would then become our responsibility to maintain.
For which highway? I'm sorry, I missed
The
that.
math doesn't come out there
77,
very
but it's
well.
12th Street.
But if we can extract some funding from ODOT in that transaction, it might make sense to council. So you're gonna see that this year. You're gonna see a proposal from ODOT to give us more of their highway for perpetual maintenance in exchange for maybe some of these signal improvements and other road improvements.
Should we change it to Sooner Road so it matches everything else? Like it's got no.
If you own it, you can probably do whatever you want with it, Mayor, but we don't own it today.
Councilor Wilson?
So on the topic of Ann Brandon, is that a private road? Ann
No,
Brandon?
it's public street.
It's public street, okay, because I know there was an HOA meeting last night and I heard that part of the conversation was that intersection and Ann Brandon being a private drive, and I didn't think that was true, so.
No, ma'am, it's public road, and ODOT has, I mean, we've been begging for years and years. It's not a new problem. It's getting worse for sure. But ODOT has advanced a project in-house. They're willing to pay for it. And it's sort of phase 1 of a total redesign of the interchange there at Highway 9 and 77. That's an old interchange that needs to be replaced. There isn't funding in the 8-year plan at ODOT for that, but this is a short-term solution there just at that intersection.
And just because my eyeballs and my eyeballs are together, what about on cue? What's happening with that? Do we know?
That's on your next agenda for the final plat, as a matter of
Okay.
fact.
Cool.
And once
That's
that's,
my common
if that's
questions in that
accepted by
area.
council, they're ready to pull the trigger and start the building.
I'd just like to say the on cue that I voted against.
Could you send her and I any updated info on the Ann Brandon?
Sure, you
Or
bet,
what
happy to.
ODOT's doing?
I think we have a recent concept plan, and I'll be, in fact, I'm having breakfast with the district engineer tomorrow morning, so I'll get that for you.
Perfect,
You
thank
bet.
you.
Before you go on,
Almost like brain balls.
Mayor,
Councilor Scanlon?
the next item pertains to my neighborhood,
It does.
and because it does, I'm gonna read a statement.
Okay.
I do live in the Vineyard Addition and would be impacted by this stormwater drainage project that's identified. By way of history, the city hired Meshik and Associates to study flooding issues in the Vineyard Addition back in 2015. In 2018, council approved funding for the final design of improvements that needed to address the flooding issues in my neighborhood. All of this happened before I obtained this seat. Although my interest is best characterized under the city's ethics ordinance as a potential conflict, in that I may benefit in some way, however indirect, from this project, out of an abundance of caution, I'm choosing to recuse myself from this discussion and any decisions that relate to it.
Thank-
I would like to participate in later discussion on other issues if you invite me back in, but for the moment, I'm heading out.
Thank you, Councilmember. We will be sure to bring you back in. Based on that statement, I was the council member in 2018 that kept moving that along. 2015, it was Councilmember Lang, and when was Councilmember Hopper?
It was actually the first flood was in August of 2007, and Councilmember David Hopper advanced the project at that time.
Okay. And we have some slides for that.
Just very quickly, Councilmember, you all have seen this when we presented this in concept last November in the Capitol Retreat. Lots of history here. I won't bore you with all that, but the Vineyard Addition, we're showing just what was the phase 1 of the Vineyard Addition right off of Porter Avenue there and Nantucket Boulevard. In the lower left-hand corner, you can see the detention basin in the red box there. There has been fairly excessive flooding of that immediate area, so lots 9 and 10, 11, 12. I think Mr. Scanlon lives on lot 14 or 15. And it all started in 2007, had a major flood, a 100-year flood on August 19th of 2007. And that was the first time that they had seen flooding of the homes damage to the homes. He had about $120,000 damage to his home at that time. So he's kind of been the poster child for damage from this flooding situation. Another major flood in 2015, same outcome. Lots of damage to the homes immediately there along that channel. It was then that Councilmember Jerry Lang asked for a flood study to try to find a solution. We completed that in January of 16, and soon after it was Councilmember Clark who asked us to advance a $30,000 capital budget allocation in a meeting like this one for the project design of that project. Council approved that at that time. We brought that back we brought in a contract with MESHAC in October of 17. And Anthony, if you'll go to the next slide. And then in April of this year, or last year rather, as you know, the voters rejected our stormwater bond issue and our enhanced maintenance program through our utility, and this project was listed as a potential project to be funded with a combination of those funds. So I lost that opportunity there in April of last year. In September, we met with the HOA there at the Vineyard Addition to present the final project design. They were very cordial to us, but that project now carries a price tag of $600,000. It's basically enlarging the detention basin there that we showed previously. It is repairing the downstream channel, and then there's some pipeline extensions and modifications in there that have to happen to make that that flooding go away for the properties. So we have the project design just as council directed us to, but there is no funding for the construction of the project, so we're looking for direction.
Councilmember Holman, your hand was up earlier. Did you have anything to add to this specific topic?
No, mine were about prior slide, so.
Okay. Councilmember Wilson.
Okay, a couple of questions about this one. Who was the original developer?
Leonard is the name that comes to mind, but he's no longer in the picture.
Which is it a company that still operates in our community?
I think this is the only development that he ever did, if I'm
Okay.
remembering right.
My next question is, or it's more of a statement, and that I know that we had a detention, I don't know what the exact function of the pond in my ward, that ward, that on Cedar Lane, do we know what I'm talking about? Okay.
Right.
That was before I got on council, but I know that they were assessed. They did an assessment to fix that. And then we have Summit Lakes that also has a situation with their private infrastructure and are doing an assessment of some sort. So is this neighborhood not okay with doing something like that, or have we talked to them about that situation?
Great question, Councilman. Your point is well taken. To my knowledge, the city has never totally financed a private stormwater detention basin repair project ever. So this would be a serious policy change if you did it. I think the closest correlation to doing this, if you chose to, would be what we call the enhanced maintenance program in our stormwater utility proposal last year, and it was a 50-50 cost share program with neighborhoods like Vineyard or Cambridge or whoever came forward, but they had to have skin in the game. So we have all along, I think in every meeting I've been in with the HOA, we've said, listen, you folks probably need to come up with at least a portion of this, and then perhaps the city council will consider matching that. To my knowledge, they have not.
So, my next question, and I just want to kind of keep going down this path, is what are we doing now to the developments that are happening now with their private infrastructure? Because I know we said on council and we hear all these great engineering plans that, oh, well, there's a stormwater problem there, but we've engineered a solution, and 20 years down the road, that solution didn't work. Is there a insurance, a bond, something that can be put in place for posterity in these cases whenever we have highly engineered water management situations that we could do that? And this can be something we think about for later. I'm just going to throw that out there, and then I'm just going to say that I do not support, as a city that's having budget problems the way we are, putting our dollars into this project. I think that neighborhood needs to take care of that. That's my official stance on
I
it.
just mentioned the other point, we have very few neighborhoods that are experiencing problems to this magnitude. Frankly, this was a mistake of the developer and the developer's engineer in undersizing the detention basin. We don't have that happening anywhere else. I don't know of any other newer subdivision since the 80s where this is occurring. If you look at the stormwater master plan, all those projects were generally focused in areas that are 40 and 50 and 60 years old before we ever had any drainage standards at all. So this is pretty unique.
Well, and I would just kind of, for everybody and for the record, you know, in my ward, we have a lot of private infrastructure in the way of roads, and it causes significant problems for our residents, and it causes significant problems for our law enforcement and significant problems for our fire staff. So I understand that this is a awful situation, but just as the awful situation out in that ward, we are not a city that's flush with funds that we can do those kinds of things with.
I share Councilmember Wilson's concerns. Clearly, I'm passionate about this project. I mean, I live across the street. My neighborhood actually gets blamed for their neighborhood's blaming or flooding, and I often will drive down there when I know it's raining hard, but I am not prepared to set the precedent where we start picking up the tab for every single private issue. I would like to explore the option that we had proposed in the stormwater 2.0, where, can you tell us a little more about the 50-50 cost share?
Sure, it was a really great model that was actually developed in the Stormwater Master Plan back in '09, and it was intended for projects just like this. Maybe the Summit Lakes Dam is a good example, where neighborhoods are having pretty large issues with their stormwater infrastructure, and this was we called it the Neighborhood Enhancement Program, where the city would assist with the design services and helping them understand what to do, but the neighborhood would then enter an agreement with the council to share in the cost. The concept was 50-50.
It's like our sidewalk plan, right?
Very similar to the sidewalk program, yes. And so a project like this, council would receive an application from the neighborhood, and we would help them do what we've done here, design the project, and council would decide whether to enter that program. The key to that was funding. And the stormwater utility had a set aside of, I'm going to say 1.2 million in this recent election that was going to be a set aside fund just for this kind of purpose. So you would have funding to honor requests on an annual basis.
Okay, great.
We anticipated during that election that you might see 5 or 10 applications a year. Obviously the funding didn't happen, so you have nothing to offer except your capital fund for projects like this.
Considering we have no funds set aside, is it even possible to do a 50-50 cost share on a project like this?
It's really your call, Mayor. I mean, we're happy to go back to the neighbors, and we've had many conversations. I got to be honest with you, the feedback I've gotten from these folks, again, there's 200 rooftops in Vineyard Edition. You're just seeing a small portion of it here. And we've identified about 8 or 9 or 10 homeowners who are having serious flooding. So frankly, what we hear there is what we've heard in some of our other stormwater meetings is, my house isn't flooding, I'm not going to pay. And so I'm not hearing a lot of support for those homes that are flooding here, and the notion that 10 homeowners could pay for a $600,000 project is probably not realistic.
So with the Summit Lakes project, a lot more houses would have been impacted should an issue have happened, including Ward 6 across the street. So would that be, you'd think, the major difference in these projects?
For sure. There's 600 rooftops in Summit Lakes, and we've already done the math on what it takes to pay for that project. And that project is in the range of this number, as a matter of fact. But you've got to split 600 ways as opposed to 10 or 200 if you get all 200 to agree. We're happy to take it back, happy to have that conversation with them. We know what to do. We know how to solve the problem. It's a money issue right now.
Thank you. Councilmember Patron?
Okay, so a few questions. Back to Sarita's brought up assessments. So maybe if we decided that we wanted to entertain this idea and do like a 50-50, can the city go ahead and assess the other 200 homes?
We can, but it's a petition-driven process. The neighborhood has to petition you to assess themselves.
And how many, what is the split in that neighborhood? Like, what is the how many rooftops?
I'm gonna say 200 homes, so you would need 50 plus one. You need 101 homeowners agree to that petition.
So the city can't just say, you know what, we're gonna do these upgrades, but we're assessing the HOA.
No, ma'am, there's not a mechanism that I'm aware of in Oklahoma that the council can force a special assessment district.
Okay. And then is there, Mayor brought up that her neighborhood gets blamed or whatever. Does that detention pond service any other neighborhoods?
No, it was designed for Vineyard Edition. It's kind of an odd, I won't worry with all the details, but kind of an odd design to have it on the upstream portion, but that's just not accurate to say that Highland Village is the contributor. Certainly Highland Village is the first neighborhood you see, but this is an enormous watershed. The runoff from Norman North High School actually comes this direction. That's how far upstream the watershed goes. So it's not certainly one neighborhood, it's 10 or 12. Vineyard is at the bottom of the hill.
I guess my question, like, unlike Cambridge, that it's routed there. I mean, that's the stormwater. It's a regional detention pond. It's not a
Correct.
neighborhood detention pond. Is that a regional detention pond?
It was designed exclusively for Vineyard Edition.
Okay. And then, let's see. The slides for this are not in our packet online.
Yeah, they were just added, in the last couple of hours, so
Okay.
we can certainly give them to you.
I'll add it. That would be great. Okay, so it sounds like basically there's only 10 houses that are affected by this, and that's really the problem, is that the HOA is not stepping up and doing the HOA's job, and in which
kind of
case
neighborhood
we
that
could
is.
potentially partner with them.
And we did have that conversation in September with them. I told them that I reminded them of what was on the ballot in April, and that I think this project might have been a candidate for that. We just have had no follow-up, no feedback from the HOA folks.
Even on the ballot, though, it wouldn't have worked because they don't have the.
Well, the enhanced maintenance program would have set you up as a council for a 50-50 program, and you would have had funding to offer. Today, you don't have that.
Right, but we couldn't pick up the other 50% from the HOA.
Correct. They would have to do it themselves. And that's the way that concept was set up, that they would come to you with their petition and their 300,000 or whatever their share was before you would even consider
Yeah,
taking on the
no, I
project.
like the program and I'm familiar with it, obviously, living in Cambridge, but it seems like even that program wouldn't have worked if we can't get we're getting such a small buy-in from that neighborhood. Thank you.
Councilmember Holman?
Whenever we're done with this stuff.
So in terms of council direction on that one, what I'm kind of hearing is no support for bailing them out. Nothing personal, but that's not a precedent that even if we were financially, we're not, and we're not going to be in the relatively near future. 50-50 seems reasonable, but they have to come on their end, and even if they did come on their end, we would still have to dedicate $300,000 to it, and since Stormwater 2.0 failed, we don't have $1.2 million a year to allocate to that. So, for guidance, I'm hearing go and talk back to the HOA, and if we do get some movement on it, then perhaps we can continue the discussion, but right now, there's really not a lot we can do.
Thank you. That's all we need to.
Okay. Councilmember Holman.
Okay, so fire station number 10, are we still anticipating that would be located in southeast Norman on property that we've agreed to, or that we have an agreement on already that we don't have to purchase?
That's correct.
Okay, and do we know when we might be trying to do fire station?
It was in, I know the property was in Destin Landing,
Destin,
Councilmember, which
yes.
hasn't really kicked off, and Chief, I don't know, it's sort of driven by the development there that would drive the need for the fire station, so.
Kind of anticipated the fire station might be the first thing that's built
Catalyst.
there because of all the development we've seen in South.
We would hope so, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we're behind the curve already in that area with our response time. So you look at the development around
Yeah.
even where Destin Landing would be, there's a lot going on, and it's a area for us to access.
Is that something are we able to access that property when we need to, or do we have to wait for them to build something out there?
I think the offering was that as part of their plating process, they would dedicate, I don't know, 2 acres or whatever it was in a certain portion of that. I remember it to be around Cedar Lane and
I'll talk to you after this.
36.
36, kind of between Highway 9 and Cedar Lane.
Okay,
area.
somewhere in there. So again, it would be more the property availability would come by virtue of a plating process, and then we would have that property to advance the project.
And then the North Base refueling, North Base fueling facility, is that in regard to our current facility?
It is. Our fleet superintendent, Mike White, is here with us. We pass a lot of fuel. We fuel unleaded and diesel today, and our fueling facility is on its last leg.
This isn't the CNG one. This is
No,
our
CNG is in
city
great
fleet
shape.
one. Okay.
This is our regular fueling facility. We've got some real serious underground leakage issues and so on that we need to address. And so you'll see a capital budget request not to completely overhaul it, but it needs a lot of work. It's been a workhorse for about 25 or 30 years, and so it's time to do some TLC on the fueling facility.
Thank you.
Councilmember Wilson.
Back to Destin's Landing, I know this is a little bit off topic, but I thought it'd be a good time to ask. You've told me before, but I need to be reminded, what kind of, isn't there, how is that development going to participate in the expansion and widening and all that road work that needs to be done out there?
Well, remember, Destin Landing was probably the largest development ever brought to council in one form. 780 acres, I think. I'm looking for Jane, that's something like that.
Yeah, it's
780 acres. We don't see developments more than 100 acres at a pop. So it's enormous. It covers 3 square miles, starting at Cedar Lane and going as far south as Post Oak. So with that, council approved a master plan that laid out all the infrastructure, how they would participate, how we would participate, phasing of the projects, and so on and so forth. Realistically, it's a 20-year plan, maybe could take 30
Yeah.
for a full
50 even,
build out,
they said.
depending on development. But they have yet to kick off. We know we are working with the developer right now on their first phase, which is there near 36 and Cedar Lane Road. And so if they bring forward a preliminary plat, maybe as early as this year, you will start to see the infrastructure elements that come as part of that plat. But there might be 40 plats by the time they're done.
So do they have a deadline to submit that preliminary?
No, we tracked it more with the phasing of the development would dictate that they do certain road improvements, certain sewer improvements, water improvements, so on and so forth.
So it could be 20 years before they submit a preliminary plat for any of that, or do they have to do anything to keep up that?
I don't think there was a trigger to start, nor was there a trigger to finish. I think it was more once they started, you held them to a certain phasing. They couldn't jump 3 miles south and come back. They had to start on the north end.
Well, it's just, is that normal, the way that works?
There was nothing normal about Destin Landing. It was I think the largest master planning effort I've ever seen. It was so large that we couldn't even fit it into our development structure in terms of the plating process, so you chose to do a master plan instead, just so we could see it all together. It's very unique.
I voted against it. But
Councilmember Holman?
I would have voted against it too.
Since Cedar Lane and 36th Avenue are being improved through a bond project, this Destin Landing is paying a recoupment.
They would pay either a deferral fee or a
deferral,
recoupment depending on the timing of their development.
Okay.
Yes.
But they are
They will
contributing to
contribute.
those projects.
Yes, they will contribute.
Yeah, that was my actual question.
Any other questions or? So, some solutions to the shortage in the capital fund and general fund that council has talked about, just to touch on some things, the reallocation of the capital sales tax. It is now, by voter direction, 0.7%. Could that be reallocated? Could that be increased? Could that be redefined such that it's 0.5% for capital and 2% that's fungible. All of those things can be talked about. Some of the projects that we're now doing out of the capital fund, could we do a general obligation bond? So for example, council made that decision some years ago when you started the 5-year rolling street maintenance bond program, and you relieved some of the burden on the capital fund and improved our ability to address street maintenance concerns. Might you expand that program and that sort of thing? So those are all things we can talk about. Might we increase the capital sales tax rate or the public safety sales tax rate or the Norman Forward sales tax rate to increase the amount of funds coming in, or extend the life of the Norman Forward sales tax? And those are all things that we can talk about.
Councilmember Wilson.
What are we bound to by state law on capital, our portion of capital sales tax? Is there any?
There's no state law limit.
No state law limit. So currently, it's just our charter that's dictating how we.
It's
how
whatever
we
the
get
voters approve,
that
basically.
changed. That has to go to voter approval.
It's an ordinance that the council would refer to the voters.
Councilmember Holman.
Just to be clear, doing new general obligation bonds, though, comes with interest rate, or we would
Yes,
be
sir.
paying interest, so it seems like when we don't have any money, it's hard to take out money, which in the end costs us more money that we don't have.
Especially with things like we need an extra $400,000 a year with bridges and the vehicle replacement and all the public transportation stuff.
Well, remember, a general obligation bond, though, comes with a revenue source to pay for it. So at the same time that the voters approve the bonds, they approve a tax levy to pay for it.
Oh, right, okay, on property
Which
tax.
basically switches our burden to.
Well, I was talking about the capital sales tax, if we reallocate any of that. That's my concern with that specific option.
Well, we reallocate the sales tax though, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping ahead, but we reallocate the sales tax to the general fund and we pay for those things with the GO bonds, then that goes ad valorem, and seems like it's a much more stable option.
Potentially. Definitely anything that we pay for with general obligation bonds, i.e. property tax, diversifies our revenue base, yes.
So are you talking a GO bond for capital projects?
Yeah. Okay. So instead of paying for it with that sales tax, then we pay, that goes into our general fund.
Then if we permanently change our capital sales tax allocation with an election to, once the ship is righted, which we will right this ship, we'll have to go back and change it so we can continue to do the kind of infrastructure improvements and maintenance that we need to do without GO bonds constantly being voted on.
That brings up a question though. If we do right the ship and we get to a point where we actually want to reallocate some of that general fund money, which let's hope all that happens, and put it back, can we as a council decide to go the other way? Or does that have to go to the vote of the people? Both
No,
both ways.
the general fund council can
We can
appropriate
allocate from the
however you
general
want
fund to the capital.
Yes, ma'am. For example, this
Gives us
building
a lot
was,
more nimble options, it sounds like, flexibility.
Okay. Councilmember Patron?
Well, I guess the original question, there's been references in several meetings about something coming forward by somebody about paying for Norman Forward projects, and does anybody know anything about this besides, because council doesn't?
So what's been transpiring in conversations with each of the ad hoc groups is to kind of get their consensus about, we now know with the participation of architects and engineers, what can be built with the budget we have versus what can be built if more money were available. What do the ad hoc committees think we really need? That last ad hoc committee meeting will take place tomorrow afternoon at 4 p.m. on the Senior Wellness Center. So we should have that information with the architects' renderings of this is what our budget will buy us versus this is what the want of the community is. Should be able to bring you that in a study session on the 25th,
Next week.
next Tuesday.
Which that will
Okay.
start at 5, I believe.
So on a follow-up to that.
Next Tuesday, sorry.
That's awesome. I guess if we're gonna send a package to the voters on paying for some of this stuff with go bonds and, since Norman Forward was shorted by that council before it even was sent to the voters. So I don't understand that for the life of me, but, if we're gonna send them a bailout that's more realistic for the projects that are in Norman Forward, it would be awesome, Madam Mayor, if we could all sit down and say, what do we want in this? If we're going to the ballot to the people with some projects, let's go. Let's fix this, capital, penny.
Percent capital.
70%.
I knew I was gonna
She
get
did it
to
on
use
purpose.
it.
She did it on
I gotta get to use this tonight. And any other issues that, we could maybe sit down and have an open meeting, retreat-ish style.
No, I completely agree. I think that's actually what next Tuesday will be.
Okay, so
be
we'll know
thinking
from
about-
them and be thinking about what, okay, that's exciting.
Councilmember Holman.
I would want us to look at a general obligation bond to do the police department, the emergency operations center shortfall, fire station 5, and maybe even fire station 10. Basically a public safety GO bond to get those projects done.
In addition to a Norman Forward GO bond? Or
Well, I
just
think those
separate?
projects need to get
I
done,
think
and
it's a
they can't be done. They're not going to be done under Norman Forward, so it's
problem.
probably going to have to be two. I'm looking at it right now too,
Complex is
Two
a
separate-
problem.
and not necessarily Norman Forward bond, although I'm not opposed to it. But I think either Norman Forward is going to have to be extended, increased, or a
Bailout.
bond for it's going to have to be done. But I think for those projects we've identified, like the police station, the 2 fire stations, maybe just fire station 5. I'm not sure if we need 10 right now or not, but
We probably need $1 million a year operationally to open
yeah.
one.
The municipal complex, I
So
mean, all of these need to be rolled into,
The bus
well, and,
barn.
The
I would
bus
add
barn?
I would add the police department. I would add IT, so that because that's not part of the 2011 bond, right?
I mean, right,
Building
C.
C is not. So I would say IT because I believe that is a public safety issue that's just as important as the police and fire department really in these days. So IT improvements, police and fire in one GO bond, and then another one that's potentially Norman Forward. But I think we also might need a transportation bond that's for the bus maintenance facility and a new bus transfer station as well. Plus maybe some bus replacement in there. So that could be 3 separate bond packages that we could be looking at.
Or one giant omnibus
Or
bond
one
package.
giant thing. But I think those are some options I'm looking forward to discussing further.
See how big my eyes are getting right now? I'm like, Councilor Patron, do you have any follow-up
I
on
was
that?
just gonna say that I think if we put them in and this is something for the 25th, but I wouldn't want, in order to make it, the less sexy projects, where they don't fail because people are like, oh, a what station? You know what I mean? I like a large package better.
Councilor Scott?
There's a bill that passed through the House last week, and it's going to the Senate, that would actually allow municipalities to leverage ad valorem tax for public safety
Yeah, the districts.
districts, so it may not be necessary to do it with a GO bond, depending, hopefully that passes.
Excellent point. That bill has been something that the Oakland Municipal League has been very, very excited about, and was started last session, but finally getting some traction this session, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So thank you for mentioning that.
Bond for IT in the police department would be
Okay. Any other comments? I would like to, somebody knows the MAPS history better than I do. Could someone please point out and clarify that MAPS 1, which is now in MAPS 4, and has done everything from education to now more social projects, had some road bumps as well with MAPS 1? Anyone?
I can speak to that a little bit, Mayor. I worked for the city of Oklahoma City when MAPS was first. It wasn't called MAPS yet. There was this idea of doing public projects and proposing a sales tax to do them. And that was Mayor Norick and those folks. And yes, it did come forward with a 1%, and that's one thing I would point out. MAPS is a 1%, as Norman Forward is 0.5%. But anyway, so it came forward with this whole list of projects, and the voters approved it barely. The first MAPS was like a 53% positive vote. But yes, as the projects moved forward, and they were pay-as-you-go projects, they were out of money. before the last project was started. And the last project happened to be what we now know as Chesapeake Arena. And so they went back and they said, okay, what are we going to do? Are we going to just scrap that project, or are we going to go back to the voters? And so that's kind of where we are now. Is and I I don't fault the council at the time or whatever. The engineers' estimates were the best that we had at the time based on square footages or something, and I didn't question them. So they were what they were, and we proposed to the voters what we thought the projects were going to cost. Now, in today's realities, they're costing more. And so the question is, do we want to go back to the voters, or do we want to do the projects at their budget, and whatever the budgets will pay for is what we do. And so that's where they were back 25 years ago. That's where we are now.
I think another comment I have about GeoBond versus extending a sales tax. Sales tax is so regressive. And if we're eyeing the RTA and we know that's going to be an additional sales tax, I personally lead towards a GeoBond for just any solution, regardless of the conversation we have on Tuesday, just because I feel like it levels the playing field with property owners and the people who aren't property owners. So that's my thoughts on the GeoBond option. Councilmember Holman.
Just adding on to what Anthony said, I think the first maps was extended for 6 months. They asked voters for a 6-month extension. Voters said yes, and that allowed them to complete the arena project. And then they were able to get maps 2 passed, which was for education, replacing schools that were crumbling.
And if we did an extension, what would that look like, though?
Right. And I would say, in regard to the original Norman Forward, our thoughts were that at 0.5% and for 15 years, I mean, many of us thought, because Norman had never proposed anything like this before, that, and especially Mayor Rosenthal, really thought it would be a real stretch that Norman voters would support this. I mean, several of us thought this might pass by 51%, 53% in first. If I had known now what I know now, that Norman Forward was going to pass by over 60%, 72%, we could have done 20 years. We could have asked for a whole percent, even though I still wouldn't have liked increasing sales tax by a whole percent. But we could have asked for 20 years at 0.5%, and then that would have, I think, covered everything. But we really felt that 15 years was really pushing the ceiling of what Norman voters would approve. And at $150 million, we cut, I don't know how many projects we did cut out of it.
Several. We
cut several out, and then we added one at the end. So we felt real conservative in 2015 that this might barely pass.
Well,
we ended up passing by a lot.
Yeah, I appreciate your historical perspective on that for sure. I mean, I helped advocate for it as Norman PTA Council President at that time, but I definitely wasn't a part of the conversation forming it, so I really appreciate that.
Where I first met Britt was at the election night party for Norman Forward.
There you go. It's like, so that's Stephen Tyler Holman. Councilmember Scanlon.
But part of the success of Norman Forward was that it was really a coalition of interests.
Yep.
And I'm not sure that would be present for an omnibus bond in this particular case. I mean, that Norman Forward scratched a lot of itches, it really did. But I think we have to be careful going forward, because I'm not sure that those coalitions exist anymore.
Well,
That was actually why I was saying to put them together. You get
I-
public safety people with
sports people,
social program
social
people.
programs. Councilmember Holman.
And I just mentioned too that a lot of folks would think that public safety is a given at the ballot box, right? But the public safety sales tax, when we made it permanent, really barely passed. It passed by, I think, 200 votes. So it was not even 51%, I don't think. I think it was 50 point something. So it might not even been that much, I can't recall, but it was a very small margin. And so, I mean, I even had concerns about making it a permanent tax. I kind of wanted to extend it for another 7 years and then maybe make it permanent after that. But so a lot of people would think police and fire, everybody supports that. But in that case, I don't know if the package we put together wasn't that great or what, but it barely passed.
Thank you. Any other comments on the options? If not, let's talk about our next steps, Mr. Francisco.
Okay, so the next steps related to the capital budget, and we've gotten some really good direction tonight. but the city manager will be working on the proposed capital and operating budget to present to council. We'll present the operating budget for the general fund and the special revenue funds on April the 14th, and the capital fund on April the 21st. So all of those things will be coming forward to you. What I'm passing around here is related to the operating budget, but this item was added to the agenda for tonight's meeting to talk about some direction going forward as we prepare the operating budget. And this is just an update to what we discussed at the mid-year budget review and what council discussed in the public hearing that was held related to that, and we got direction at both of those meetings, and we have moved forward with some savings to offset a part of the shortfall in the general fund related to the continued apportionment of sales tax. So basically what you see here is the same list that you saw at the mid-year budget review and in the public hearing that we held afterwards. The things that have check marks by them are things that either by council consensus or by the direction of the city manager, we have moved forward with implementing those savings areas. And again, I do not want to minimize, with all of my fellow department heads here, the impact of these things. Just understand that there are downsides to this hiring freeze. There are downsides to not doing a mosquito control program. But those things have been implemented, and I wanted you to see that. We got council direction or consensus that you did not want to cancel that census contract. You did not want to cut the funding for the Social and Voluntary Services Commission for next year. But the things that you see the question marks for are the things that we've not gotten a real clear direction on. We'll talk about those outside agencies at the Finance Committee meeting later this week, but that will be about $300,000 worth of savings if we decided not to fund those agencies. Again, there's downsides of doing that. So I'm not saying that I'm recommending any of these things. But where we were given the direction that you did not want to lay off any people this fiscal year, we've come up with about $2.39 million worth of savings this fiscal year towards that $3.5 million shortfall that we have in the general fund. So we have a pretty good start, okay? And then next fiscal year, as we prepare the budget, we'll be doing these things and a lot more to fill the hole in next year's budget. But again, this is just for your information, and if you have any direction on those areas where we have some question marks, this would be a good time to talk about them.
Well, I really appreciate you hearing our feedback so far, and I think everyone on council did make time to attend the public hearing, and everyone that attended the public hearing, so I think we can say we did our due diligence in getting feedback on this. So we're still about, again, 1.2 million short of that $3.5 million goal, but City Manager Pyle, how are we going to get to that if we agree with everything right here, right now, and move forward and just pull the trigger?
So in kind of the simplified version to tighten our belts, as opposed to making broad statements like X% across the board cuts, that doesn't necessarily reflect your goals and objectives for the priority of the delivery of service. So what we're looking at is in our conversation with our management team that currently we're about 14% under budget for this time of the year. So our goal is to maintain that level of budget conservation leading into June 30, and dollars not spent in the current fiscal year would be dollars reduced in next fiscal year's budget. So some departments will come in further under budget than that based on some vacancies they may have or projects that we just didn't engage in. And then so kind of give us a starting point for next year's budget, hopefully coming in conservatively balanced. Recognizing that if revenue projections improve during the course of the next fiscal year, we can bring you back mid-year budget adjustments and actually add revenue back to the picture and start putting some meat back on the bones in some of these budgets.
Thank you, Mr. Pyle. Thoughts on that, Councilmember Holman?
I really have a problem with the assuming that we're not going to have a weather event. Until June gets here at the earliest, I would not feel comfortable cutting that. I also reduce of prisoner care. What is $25,000 pay for prisoner care?
Basically, at the rate that we're spending the prisoner care funds, we should have that amount of savings.
So we're not reducing a meal to them or anything
We're not
like
reducing
that.
a meal to them.
You get a half a sandwich.
I mean,
Not incarcerating as many people.
that's good
That's
too.
what I was
Yeah.
gonna say.
The rest of them, I agree. There's some pretty significant consequences to all these, but I mean, outside of the emergency savings, I think those are ones we can live with. I mean, no fireworks this year in Norman. It's not a big deal to me, and I know a lot of veterans and others would appreciate it, but I know a lot of families and stuff
dog people
won't
will be
appreciate it,
happy.
I'm sure. Dogs. So,
Way to see the bright side.
Right.
Councilman Wilson.
but I mean,
So the census figures
mosquitoes
not
aren't a big
included
problem
in
on
that.
my street. I don't know.
Well, I share your concerns about the emergency savings. I do have a quick question about the snow days that we had. We have gotten some weather. I was just looking at the National Weather Center. There looks to be some winter weather north of us, though, but later this week. So definitely don't think we're in the clear on this one. Out of the 786,000 and change, like if we have another snow day, that doesn't mean, oh, sorry guys, can't salt the roads anymore. Like, what does that mean?
Well, Mayor, that amount is really targeted toward that massive tornado where we're having to clean up major debris in a span of 2 months that we don't have any budget for. We budget for snow and ice control every year. We plan on 4 to 10 events. We really had 2 or 1.5, really. And as I tell our street superintendent, Tony, when I get to February 1st, I'm breathing easier every year because our chances of having a major snowstorm to the extent that we're going to spend big dollars is diminished with each day closer to spring. Now, we've had some killer events in March and April, so it can happen, but the weather projections are not leaning that way. So it looks like we're going to underfund or spend our snow and ice control budget by perhaps $40,000 or $50,000. That's one of the savings that Mr. Powell was speaking to. We won't know that until the season is up. And of course, by that time, we could be in tornado season and have a whole other set of challenges. But the bigger numbers there are really targeted at these very damaging weather events, blizzards, tornadoes,
Floods.
microbursts. We've had them all.
It is worth pointing out that we had the most tornadoes in state history last year. Norman just got lucky. Councilmember Wilson?
If we have a significant wildfire event, is Paul in that as well? Because, okay.
And again, I hate to say it, but if we're lucky enough to qualify for disaster relief, that does offset our funding. We never want to qualify for a presidential declared event because then it's really bad.
Did the wildfires of 20?
That was a declared disaster, yes.
Yeah, the qualifier, I think, Chief can correct me, I think our qualifier now in Norman or Cleveland County is about $780,000 in damage to public facilities. 900. Okay, now we're up to about 900,000 in damage to public facilities. Then we qualify for disaster relief from FEMA. That means we will have had to have almost $1 million in damage to roads, bridges, public buildings, you name it, before we even begin to qualify for federal relief.
Basically just the parking lot to a senior center is $1 million. We've learned that.
Sounds
Sounds
like
like a lot until you start building it.
Yep. Any other thoughts on the emergencies? That's the biggest one. I think it's one we can point to. We haven't used it in several years, but man, gambling on Oklahoma weather.
Yeah.
Feel like if we make it through this, we should all go to Vegas or something, because that is
Lottery.
nerve-wracking. Councilmember Holman?
On state two, I'm not against using the minimum rainy day fund part, the part that doesn't trigger us having to re-up it. So, I mean, $496,000.
The reason that there's an X there is, remember that one of the strings attached to appropriating funds out of the rainy day fund is that the emergency reserve has to have been spent.
So that money's still in there for your,
For the big disaster,
for the event.
Yeah.
That makes me feel a little better about that.
Any other thoughts? Or are we ready to move on this and pull that Band-Aid off and move forward?
I'm not a big fan of the summer park maintenance, but I know that we have other ways, other accounts that go to parks, so.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other comments or questions.
Thank
So-
you all very much. I did want to first thank Kim Kaufman, our budget manager. She did the majority of the work related to this presentation, and introduce you to Jacob Huckabee, who is our new budget technician, and he is the one working with all the project managers and keeping all of these projects straight.
What a fun time to
So you
join
saw
in.
me.
You know, like 30 years from now, you can be like, I remember 2020.
He'll have less hair, it'll be great.
That's right. But thank you all for putting together a list that saves jobs, and we're gonna feel it, but I think we can get through this, and we will right the ship, and everything's gonna be, I'm optimistic for the future, as long as we don't have a natural disaster, so. All right.
As are we.
Tag Australia.
Seeing no other comment, we're gonna go ahead and conclude tonight's study session. Thank you all. Pizza up here, if anyone's still hungry.